Hello and welcome to the first of a new series I'm attempting to get out there where we talk more about the general broad topics that maybe don't have as much KPIs or metric or even security direct value, but we dive into more of the topics we have some passion towards, something we care about, and something me and Amanda both share was when we met each other, it was all about relationships, playing games, getting to know each other, which was only about 2 months ago. So, Amanda, thank you for just hitting it off with me, being a real, genuine person, and wanting to do this webinar where we not only can get to know each other live on air further, but also share our opinions on topics that mean something to us.
Thank you for having me, and thank you to Brittany for making the introduction. Since she's the one who really started. I don't even know, what was that, like throwing food in the air or something. Something that happened late at night.
Brittany Orzini definitely facilitated this relationship. Best friend of my own and Scott Stanley to play code names at the table. Shout out MSP GeekCon for
Yeah.
having a boardroom game area, because me, as a little bit on the extroverted side, I have a strong passion towards competition, specifically when it comes to cards or board games. And holy crap, that had it all.
Yeah, that's why you and Brittany are friends.
That is
But I
fair.
think
I don't doubt that.
I think that's probably a really good example of how, and I know I'm starting and I'll probably end up ruining the slide somewhere, but facilitating fun interactions between vendors and clients, potential clients, MSPs, whatever name you want to attribute it to, can lead to something really interesting. That's
It
probably
really
not.
can.
Yeah.
I definitely never, I probably never would have come across you, right? These shows, and every vendor experiences it, every MSP vendor experiences it. I can't talk to all those vendors. I can't, as a vendor, I can't talk to all the people at this show. There's only so much time, only so many words that can be said. And we have to prioritize that. And a lot of us do fall into the safety trap or the comfort zone of surrounding ourselves with people we already know. So, big shout out to MSP GeekCon again. That game room really facilitated a lot of new people, a lot of new friends, and relationships that carried on after the show.
Yes, agreed. I mean, I'm
So
biased, but
we might have a board member in the webinar with us. So we got to be transparent about why we're plugging. So
yeah,
no, we're plugging hard because we appreciate what they do with the
yeah,
community.
yeah.
So, before we do dive into these hot topics, Amanda, obviously both of us consider ourselves passionate on the topic, but what makes you willing to go on a live stream and talk about vendor relationships and authenticity? Like, who's Amanda?
Well, I am pretty authentic, and I apologize in advance if anybody showed up for something super professional. At some point, shit's going to get real in a way that you probably didn't anticipate.
And there's the warning. If there's kids on here, there will be words said.
Yeah. Um, I've always been a fairly authentic person. I just am who I am. I don't really know how to be anybody else. You always might hold back parts of yourself in terms of how much you let out there, but any version of what anybody has met is definitely who I am. And that's how we run our MSP. I run an MSP with my husband. We're like that with our clients. And I know we have some pretty interesting clients, one in particular who likes to call us, and when he goes to put his review in, he always chooses a different language with which to submit it,
Oh,
so that our techs have to translate using Google Translate, and who knows what it is this time. Um, and
that's one way to be memorable.
Yeah, I mean, but that's a pretty good example of how we translate who we are into how we deal with clients, but then also what we do when we're talking to vendors. And for me, most of my time in the MSP space has been kind of behind the scenes in the company, helping with process and kind of operationally how things go. But I don't really know that I really understood community's role in that and what benefits could come from that until I joined MSP Geek. And I really didn't do that until I went to the conference for the first time. So for me, it was kind of like a speed run
Yeah.
of just learning a lot of things all at once. So I get really passionate about protecting the space that we're building that includes all of us, to make sure that everybody's kind of not working it, but kind of the right way, so that it keeps, I don't know, going deeper into what we can do together.
Sure.
That for me is really interesting. There's a
I
benefit there.
mean, I think most of the people at shows, a lot of MSPs, the business owner is still the person who goes to these shows and is most involved. But I mean, in full honesty, every engineer I talk to has a bit of an entrepreneur mindset. I've never heard of an engineer, stopping at the 9 to 5. Maybe some very mature MSPs, the engineers have the ability to do that, but a lot of the engineers at these smaller MSPs, and correct me if you're wrong, if I'm wrong here, but they're willing to put in those extra hours and make sure the business is operational a lot of the time, maybe sometimes more than they should.
I think it really depends on the engineer. I think MSP space kind of lends itself more to that because you do have to wear so many different hats, right? Like if you were to go into internal IT, oftentimes you get pigeonholed into one type of
Hmm.
technology, whereas with MSP you have to be able to switch, kind of what you're doing and what you might be tackling that day. Both engineers, business owners, whatever role you play at the company, you don't know what you could be doing that day. Heck, I got an office administrator here who can help out with deploys if she needs to. So I
Oh
mean,
boy.
yeah, it just like you wear different hats, right, in order to serve that function, and then you start to see what the benefit is for the business. So then, I don't know if I would say that's an entrepreneurial mindset. I really do think you have to have the mindset that we're an ecosystem and that
Okay.
we all exist and with the help of each other, which I mean is the channel in and of itself too. So yeah,
Yeah, and we'll talk about that more. So without spoiling some of the outline we
I'm
set
gonna do
forth in
that
the
by accident,
slides,
but
no, it's all good. The whole point of this is storytelling, so absolutely great kickoff. Just to give my background, I am one of the co-founders to Senteon, a managed endpoint hardening solution, and why this matters to me is I'm the new guy to the space. That was I know it also. It's coincidentally your one of your first few shows that you'd been to because you are just really starting to get out there and really involved, but for me as a vendor, that was my third time wearing this shirt outside. So
mm,
very much brand new to me. And getting to see a lot of the people I've met virtually and build the relationships and meet new faces really matters to me. And it's kind of, I guess, in a way, built my confidence to continuously do these webinars, to build additional content, and know that my voice is wanted to be heard even though it's a vendor. So
yeah,
that's really the big thing to me. And just experiencing the community aspect and whatnot. We talk about MSP Geek a lot, but there's a lot of communities out there. I'm heavily involved with the tech degenerates specifically. And shout out to the IR games. I'm now going to be a facilitator and volunteer organized with that. So just a lot of opportunity out there, whether you're a new guy, an existing guy or gal. It's all
thank you.
available out there. I know you're very big on that, and I need to do better myself.
It's
So
okay.
there
You
might be some
corrected it. It's great.
corrections on
That's
my
that's a good
side.
start. It's all good.
But yeah, let's go ahead and hop into this title slide here. So no bullshit vendor relationships, right? This is what we want to talk about here. So let's just jump into that first slide here. So more than a handshake. So when we talk about this, three things for me really come to mind. When I meet someone new, it has to be intentional, right? I want that relationship. It has to matter to me, and I'll kind of talk towards this point first because I just got out of a conversation with John Harden from Avik. So shout out to him. He's heavily involved with
Sounds
CompTIA.
great.
He was CompTIA Community Member of the Year, and I was telling him, being one of the few external faces of Senteon, a early stage company where we don't have a ton of people resources available, I have a lot of back to backs, and he kind of jumped back at me with some input because he has that same experience being with, I think SAS Leo was his previous
Yep.
company. And he goes, doing all those meetings is great. Of course, it generates business, but if you're only doing like C plus effort to all of those because you're so overwhelmed, cutting those back and doing A plus effort to fewer meetings is going to mean more in the long run. So wanted to give him a shout out because like literally the conversation happened an hour ago, super relevant to this webinar. But intentional relationships, Amanda. I mean, when you meet a vendor, how much does it matter how they interact with you on a personal level outside of the technology?
It's I think it's everything for me. I mean, that's how I make a lot of decisions. And I mean, the technology, the product has to be there. It has to be aligned with how, we're going to be able to scale it in terms of
Sure.
pricing and the structure and whatever. But if I'm going to take a piece of my business and put it in your basket and ask you to manage that and to be my partner in that, then I have to trust you. Then I have to know that you're going to respect it the way that I would respect the fact that I have employees that rely on this business, for their livelihoods, that I have clients that look at me and don't know about the
Sure.
30 vendors that we might be dealing with in the background. They only know me, so my reputation is in your hands. So I have to know that who I'm dealing with is going to be someone who's honest, who's accountable, and I like the title is perfect, no bullshit, because I don't want it. If something's wrong, I want to know, but I want to know what you're going to do to fix it, and I just want clear communication, right? It's for me that intentionality has to be there. It can't just be about how can I make more money off you. It should be how can we grow together.
And let's, so I appreciate everything I heard there. And the word intentional, I feel like we might be bypassing just like what the connotation of this word really means. Like running into it at a show, that wasn't necessarily intentional, but
No.
me reaching out after the show, me asking you, hey, what's something you're interested in? Like to me, that's really intentional. So, I mean, comparing it to like run-ins or like, hey, how are you doing? Like just random automated emails. I'm sure you get automated emails,
Um,
Amanda. Is that?
oh yeah. On
I mean,
LinkedIn or in my inbox. Sure.
yeah, those are sometimes fun to respond to if they're really bad. Anyway, um,
That's
what
a whole webinar, and you
that's
should
a
totally
whole
let
webinar
go of
on
that
on
one.
yeah, input the keyword. I remember when I put like emojis in my name just so I could like weed out easier. Anyway, it doesn't
Yeah.
matter. Um, so this concept of just automated pings, automated messages, whatever that is there an impactful difference from a actual articulated email or targeted at you that you can obviously tell wasn't mass sent?
So I think this is such an interesting topic because I think when you consider automation, I'm pro automation. I think there's
Yes.
there's definitely a place or a benefit for it, right? I think if you have an existing client and you want to automate a check-in, that sounds wonderful. But when you're initially building that relationship, when you haven't got on their radar yet, when you don't have any established trust, it feels cold. And usually you can sense that this was just done, whatever. It's the same as, and here's the thing, being involved in sales, I can see different sales tactics that come at me
Mm-hmm.
from different angles. There's always a way to approach things, right? If you automate, you lose that ability to change how you're approaching it based on the person. And let me tell you, though I might be a very direct person, the email that comes to me saying, I guess this isn't on your radar anymore and I'm just going to stop bothering you and some other bullshit like that, like it turns me off. I don't want to talk to that person anymore because it feels like a pressure tactic. And then that's
Yeah.
like, I don't want to do business with you because you're pressuring me. I want to do business with you because it's aligned, right? And that might be aligned on your schedule or on my schedule, whatever it works. I mean, Zach, you've tried to nail me down for or a time frame to talk. You know what my schedule is like. Um,
Eventually, but have I annoyed you?
no, no, which is great. But my point being that like automation takes away some of that nuance to be able to deal with that. I think automation has its place. I just don't know if I would agree that it would be in the beginning. You want to automate newsletters, you want to automate information.
Yes.
Like that's a great way to use it when you're trying to establish trust. But those reach outs, I feel like they've got to be personal. But that's me.
Yeah, I mean, all of this webinar is our opinions. That's the whole point of this, right?
Yeah.
Just getting the conversation started because, I mean, when we're at trade shows, I think conversation is one of the easier things. We all have things on our mind, but talking about these post the show, keeping it top of mind, I think is the piece we miss. And you do your own, you got to call it vlog series. I don't know I forget what the company,
Off
the
66, yeah.
off six, yeah. And I know you and Tara are both doing it, and that's bringing those more personal topics to light and keeping the conversation going post the show. So big shout out to that. And you did say, one thing you mentioned before, I've tried to ping you down and whatnot, and I realize, hey, it doesn't matter, but we haven't had that conversation. You're not an active Senteon
I
partner,
am
right?
not. Nope.
So
I just like
the
Zach. I
fact
think he's funny.
so that intentional relationship that we have and we're doing right here by you joining the show. I mean, you didn't have to say yes to this. I'm just a random guy at the end of the day. A
But you
random
also didn't
vendor
have
at
to give
that.
me a platform to talk about it either. I think though that that's the nuance that we're talking about in this webinar is like if you go into it saying well, I want a customer out of it, then that's the only consideration. But if you go into it saying, it'd be really great to make things better in the channel, it'd be really great to make my product better, it'd be really great to have conversations that can help me understand more. And then what happens is we just start learning together.
Mhm.
There's a really great book that actually talks about this from a sales perspective that I appreciate it. It's by Patrick Lencioni. Unfortunately, the title is called Get Naked, which sounds terrible, but it is a very good book. But he talks about basically being vulnerable and just going into it and start consulting, start being who you'd be anyway, right? So that people get a flavor of what it's like to work with you. And I think that's what these intentional and real relationship building conversations end up being, because then you're getting more of an idea of what it's like to work with that person.
That's awesome to hear. And yeah, I mean that's exactly how this kicked off. Being the new guy, this is really what it is. And we got Harry in the comments. You're just a guy who walked on
Harry.
stage with a box of paper. So Harry was one of the very fortunate people who saw my very first time wearing this shirt outside, where I was fortunate to work with Cyber QP, and I actually brought 1,500 pages of printed CIS benchmarks. Yeah, you can get a kick out of this. And the audience was not they were attentive. They had watched a lot of pitches, so I just simply dropped a 1,500-page box on stage to make a sound, and it got some eyes.
Harry also brought us donuts to our MSP, so we are Harry fans here.
So absolutely appreciate the shout out and memory on that one. I actually never posted the recording because ZB took a full video of it. Thank God, because I got such a kick out of watching it myself. So I'll personally note and shout out ZB here. When myself and Brittany did the 7-minute pitch over at MSP GeekCon, like having someone take a video of you in the audience without asking whatever. Like I didn't ask ZB to do that, but he actually did it, and it helped me critique or better understand how I came off and what I can do better. And I think Harry would agree. I could have dropped that box from a couple inches higher.
You got to go to the gym those days. That's a lot of paper to carry.
I just thought the boom might be a little too much, but clearly there was room for opportunity. So, and anywho, more than a handshake. I mean, we got a couple other things. Show up or shut up. No half measures. We really emphasize the intention on here, but showing up or show up or shut up. You have strong opinions. A bad vendor comes up. It can be a bad rep, or it may just not be the right rep for you. I mean,
Yeah.
this show up or shut up type of mentality and no half measures, it all feeds into the intentional relationship and being intentional with your motions and what you're saying. But I mean, I'll just ask the general topic. Obviously, you have opinions on this, but the general point here: show up or shut up. Is it better for a vendor to reschedule a meeting or show up without anything new to say?
Oh no, reschedule. My time is finite, and so is theirs. I mean, realistically, if
Can you
you have
tell when that
dials or
vendor on the other side is just showing up to show up?
yeah, and even sometimes too, like showing up inappropriately in different ways. So I won't name the company, but I was at IT Nation Connect last year, and there was the party portion of the night where we were out at karaoke.
Sure.
And I was having a great time next to my account manager from Ninja. Shout out to Nicole. And we were singing along in the audience, and a rep came up from another company and realized that I was an MSP and started pitching me in the middle of singing. And I was like, not the time to show up, not receptive to this at this moment. And I mean, that would be probably a really good example of a time to shut up, because it's really not the time for that.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say that rep did show up again another time at an appropriate time and did a
Okay.
fantastic job. So sometimes persistence is good too. I think like showing up means trying, right? We're just really distracted animals running
All of
around
us.
in a
Not
cage.
referring
Like,
to MSPs, like
no,
literally myself as well. My head is cut off the entire day.
yeah, we're basically chickens at this point. And what happens is, sometimes we need that reminder, right? And it's not a diss to the vendor or whatever. It's just the craziness of whatever that's going on. So some grace for that. But I've definitely been in a few sales meetings where the person has like shown up and they're just phoning it in, and they're not paying attention to the cues too, that like what we're talking about is not at all we're not on the same page.
Yep.
There's a security vendor that we met with, and they were basically saying, yep, we will take care of all of it for you. We will, talk to the customer. We'll be the one that interfaces with them if there's an incident. And I was like, but what if we want to? Like, well, no, you don't need that hassle. Like, I probably asked the question like 8 different ways, and they were not picking up on the fact that I don't want to
That's
hand
what
that over.
mattered.
That's what
Yeah.
matters to me, right? Like, and that's fine. There are other
That's a
people that would
golden
want something
nugget.
different, right? But for me, I'm letting you know with my questions. That's probably not the approach I want to take. So tell me how your solution can fit my approach, or just stop this call, because if it doesn't, then it doesn't. And I
And
actually
I
had a
mean,
vendor do that once. It was really great.
we could probably for another session we should literally just do a role play. Seriously, like I love role plays. It's what I do, and I don't get enough over at Senteon because again, we don't have that many resources for me just to role play. I have great advisors and mentors I can do it with, but hey, let's just what's the saying? Okay, let's do it live.
Why did you say that so quietly? You should have owned it.
But no, what your example was a question I would have potentially asked back was, hey, why do you want to do this yourself? Have you had bad experiences of other vendors working with your end client, right? I'd want to understand more of the full picture of what's
Yeah.
behind you not letting me. Like, why aren't you letting me? Like, I would want to understand why from my point of view.
Yeah, and I mean, and that would totally be a conversation we could have had, but that was not the direction. It was like, I'm not going to listen to what you're saying. I'm just going to tell you. Oh, there's my marketing person saying we'll do it live. Oh my God.
She missed the first part, but we'll do it live.
Yeah, yeah. But in any case, like it would have been a conversation. It would have been a much different. I could have explained it, and if it would have fit, it would have been great. And then if not, they would have been like, "Yeah, then we're not the one for you," which is exactly what happened in the other scenario that I was talking about. I explained myself because they asked around it, and I let them know, and they're like, "You know what? I don't know that this is a fit then." And ultimately, I know that everybody wants to make sales, but if it's not the right client, then it's not the right client. They're going to end up leaving anyway, and then you had all that cost to onboard them and take them in, and then they're out there representing your brand, not using your product properly, which is its own webinar.
Yep, absolutely. So that's, resonate completely with me. And just to kind of put a bow on this slide and we'll get moving on. I know we have a lot of content. Like, again, being that early stage vendor, this is all we got, right?
Yeah.
There's times where, you know, depending on the scope we're looking at, right? Maybe the large player has similar enough technology where it's like not as good, but it's like good enough. Maybe I should just go with them. Like, but the big vendor may not have this human to human relationship. So any of my pitch it group or any early stage vendor listening in on this, like this matters to people.
Yeah.
I said put a bow on it, but talking to your
No.
story, you I'm a long storyteller as I've heard from many. But what you were saying was, you did have a security vendor who came at you at the wrong time, right? Out of curiosity, again, being as bold and direct and authentic, point of this webinar, did you ever share to them like, hey, that was a bad time, or are you just hoping it doesn't happen again?
I did. I let them know I was not in the place for that, and the person who I was speaking to was like, "Oh, that's totally fair." And I don't know, knowing how persistent they are, I don't know that she would have changed that. But it is feedback for working with me now, and definitely as our relationship has continued, I can see that showing up. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I think that's one thing as well, just to emphasize, and then we'll get on to this next slide, is me as a vendor, especially a vendor figuring things out, I would literally love that feedback. Like just
Mm-hmm.
to know. Like that matters to me because I don't want to do it again. I don't want to make the next potential partner feel uncomfortable or ask them at the wrong time. And if I'm not given that feedback, how am I going to be better? So,
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
right. So really appreciate your mindset on that, but let's keep things moving. So we got community, emotions, and growth. And I'm realizing the two logos I tossed in the bottom left are hidden. So I'm going to move those in real time and see if it actually updates.
I can see the
Let's
MSP Geek and IR ones on my screen.
see.
Oh wow,
Oh,
they're
look
big.
at that live
Good job, Zach.
moving. Incredible. Just a dynamic host right here. All right. Community, emotions, and growth. So the big thing here, and we've talked about this at the beginning, is community. I do believe MSPs are in a very special space to where community matters a little bit more than
Mm-hmm.
what I've seen in other places. And for my own background, I come from enterprise sales, selling more products rather than software. But this aspect of community that I've found in the MSP space is so much different than anything I've seen before. So curious if you could just talk at a high level why you think community matters so much more in this space as opposed to other spaces, or if you disagree with me, maybe it
No, I
matters in both.
agree. The one thing that I do disagree about, and I think we did talk about this in our original one, but I have said it with other people. I think that it's not that it's special to the MSP space. What I find is that, remember, like, for those who don't know who I am, though I own an MSP, before I owned that, I owned a wedding photography company. And so, being a wedding photographer for so many years, you're a sole proprietor, and the communities that exist there are much the same. You could be sitting in the room next to your competitor, and you're all training on how to do this new thing, and you have to be able to put your own spin on it because it's art, right? So, but the business side of it is where usually you differentiate yourself, and it's much the same as the MSP space. We all have different stacks, we all have different approaches to do it. It's the business side, where you're differentiating yourself, but the understanding of the technology is the technology, right? So when you're going and you're learning about these things, learning it together, it's not competitive in the same way if you really think about it, because it's not the things that you're going to compete on with customers, right? So I think there are other communities out there for different professions. I think what's different about the MSP space is that usually you see that in the sole proprietor. And here you see it, in a company that could be 3 people, it could be 100 people. So it's like when you grow, you don't lose that because you valued the community. The potential for growth is so much more, right?
And, and this is getting
And
called out in real time right here in the comments. As you can see on the screen, like little guy or small guy, as this little guy, you just said this, Amanda, it's the number one thing.
yeah, yeah. I think what they might be relating to as well is like, um, business in general is like that. So we're just translating what happens in our ecosystems that we live in geographically out into the wider world, and seeing how you can utilize that, both from a perspective of leveraging it, but also from how you can give back. To the second point of your slide is, if you're going to get something out of it, you should probably put something into it as well, right?
Absolutely. And you said one thing, we're in this unique space. There's a lot of vendors, like ourselves, who exclusively work with MSPs, right? If an enterprise reaches out to Senteon, we'll pass it to a VC, so distribution partner, whatever we want to do with that deal. But you mentioned, not really competing for the same audience, right? I'll never have a true SMB with an IT staff of 1 or 2 or even 0 reach out to Senteon to do configuration management.
No.
They won't. That's why I work with MSPs, because I know I will never get any inbound demand if I only target those. We may get a large enterprise and whatnot that falls outside of the scope of our MSP audience. But overall, we don't compete vendor to SMB as MSP to SMB. So I do agree that's another thing that keeps us, I guess, wanting or needing even to work together more and have this community a little bit more top of mind than other respective spaces.
It's a supply or food chain, however you want to say it, but basically the reason why is, even if a person who has a 1 to 3 person business needs what you have, for you the scale isn't there to be able to deal with them on that level,
I would
right?
have to turn those deals down if
Yeah,
you don't have
yeah. So
someone who
for us,
manages Senteon.
yeah, so for us, like, because we're offering more than one thing, there can be economies of scale. Now, obviously, I'm not saying at 3, but more like 10. Um,
Sometimes
but
30, 40.
yeah, I mean, but that's where, for us, we find a bit of a sweet spot. But there's plenty of different ways to approach that, but we're all in interdependence of each other and how it works. And so the community, I mean, I was a recent participator of our games, and I really enjoyed it. I found I learned a lot by participating. But you're, again, going to be hard pressed to not get me to share my MSP Geek love, because what I've been able to learn in that community. Now, remember, we talk about an ecosystem. For me, the giving back portion is, I now have this pool of like 10,000 technicians or more, could
Yep.
be owners, could be whatever, is willing to share information about things that are very technical in nature. Some of them who've like opened up their calendar and said, "Here, book a time with me, and I'll give you a half an hour of my time, and I'll record it so you can teach your staff too." Like crazy, like amounts of sharing. So what do I do? What can I give who's not
Yep.
technical? I could tell you how to have hard conversations with your staff, or how to motivate somebody who might be demotivated. Right? Bring soft skills into it. So it's a way to share a different set of knowledge. And I think for people who are in the community, also probably appreciate the weird other stuff that I share or my outrage in general because I have a bit of a personality. But
Little
uh,
vent channel. I mean, there's plenty of opportunity to post wherever you want. And
yeah.
I love Eric's comment here because he was actually who I was thinking of. He's a friend of the Tech Generates, and he is an active user of their vent channel and will
Mm.
sometimes post there.
But nobody understands it the same way as somebody else who's in the space, right? Whether that be a client's understanding of what it is we're trying to do, or maybe misunderstanding of what it is we're supposed to do. And when you talk to your peers, when you go out there and you get ideas, it isn't just, okay, here's what you could do. It's also, yeah, I had the same thing. You aren't alone, and we're all in this together. And this is how I tackled it, or maybe not. Maybe just listening sometimes is also necessary.
Yep, absolutely. And um, specifically, again, I'm going to keep giving the perspective of this new vendor. This matters to me more than the next inbound lead. Me just getting to have relationships with you, right? Because at this stage of our company, and depending on what stage of any early stage startup is, you may not have you may be pre-revenue, right? If I was
Mm-hmm.
pre-revenue, we could still have this relationship. If I was pre-product, we could still have this relationship. Our relationship here is not based on our technology.
No.
And when I want that meeting or, work together on that schedule, pre-product, pre-revenue, I could have asked for sincere input on, hey, are we building this the right direction? Will someone actually pay for what we're considering building? And those types of relationships are product agnostic. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter what the product or the technology does, it's just the relationship. So, big shout out on you wanting to give back, contributing to the forums. I think that's a big MSP Geek initiative, is
It
how to
is.
get more new engagement and new commenters in the channel, which I appreciate. We all have something unique to share. We're all SMEs in different areas, especially like no one wants to talk about asset configuration, which is all I want to talk about. I've done 50 weeks of webinars on over 500 GPOs, and I don't think that many people know 500 GPOs. So when Microsoft has a new, Windows update that clears out a GPO, and I'm like, hey, everyone, Windows did a thing again. You no longer have this policy in place if you're using it before, right? There's so many things that are super
Yeah. Yeah.
granular that people don't think about. And that SME, that input, not only builds your personal brand, which probably a whole nother presentation on what that is, but it allows you to make friends.
Yeah, I think, that was probably one of my biggest takeaways from the first MSP Econ was like I said, it was my introduction to the community. Kelvin did a talk, and he talked about how the community had been a force multiplier for his business, like just being able to go out there and almost crowdsource all that information. And then because you benefit from it so much, because we all want reciprocity, going out and turning around and giving back, it only feels right. And then you'll see that it just keeps the cycle going.
Yep, absolutely. So giving back, I mean, we just talked about contributing to forums, being that SME. Is there anything else that comes to mind for, let's talk about vendor point of view. I mean, either point of view. What can we do as a vendor or MSP or each respectively to give back? Do you have any other ideas we haven't talked about?
I mean, I think a lot of times people will go and complain about products without necessarily going to the
This is such a
vendor.
good point.
Like you need to be able to tell them when things, like my vendors, the ones that I have relationships with, because there are some that's just transactional, I'll be honest. But the ones that I have relationships with, when things have been misaligned, I'm not shy about telling them respectfully. And it doesn't mean that, I think somebody should be fired or that somebody isn't whatever. It's just they're not a right fit for me. Maybe it was an account manager or whatever. Maybe it's a way that they're approaching something. Whatever the case may be, they're not going to know unless I give it to them. Remember that a lot of people will sit in a room. It's very rare, but it happens where MSPs move on to vendors and then they either consult or work for a vendor and then they give the feedback, right? But unless they stay in touch with where they were before, eventually the scope of what they understand about the MSP space can shift. So it's on us as the ones who are using the product to be a part of advisory boards, to give feedback in whatever way that we can, account manager on up, whenever you get a
Yep.
chance, of what's working and what's not working. And that way, it's not just going to make things better for you, but it could make something better for somebody else in the channel as well. So, but
Yep.
nobody can know. Just like, there's nothing worse than when a client leaves you as an MSP and you found out later that they had, this to say, this to say, this to say, and you had no chance to address it. As a
Yep.
business owner, we want that afforded to us. Why wouldn't we do that with our vendors?
Yep. I mean, that's an aspect I think a lot of people don't say verbatim. MSPs are vendors. They
Yeah.
just service a different industry or different market, right?
Yeah.
We're all vendors, just except for
Right.
that very end client. But even them, they're vendors to their end consumer, right?
Yep.
So I think that's just a food chain or supply chain that we don't really think about. We just get hung up in here's my priorities. I'm strapped for time. I'm the most important thing in the world. This vendor needs to, he's below me, right? And that's not the case if you want to have a more
Ecosystem, Zach.
more
It's an
successful
ecosystem.
ecosystem.
Yeah.
Yep. And I care more about like the conversation more than the slides, so we may not get to all of them.
It's
But
fine.
you
That's just
said
how it works for me anyway.
that's just how it works. I'm a long storyteller. You're a great storyteller.
We should have booked an hour and a half.
We could have gone for 90 minutes. I know
Yeah.
that. Transactional versus partner. You said something very subtle in there. Didn't really explain what that meant. Do you
Yeah.
mind?
Yeah. So I think, ooh, I got to be careful what I say here.
Tech is so good you don't care about the relationship, or
No, I think there are some things that are, they serve its purpose, and there's not a lot of variables in what you choose, more so just whether or not the pricing fits, and there isn't really much of a chance to give feedback on what can happen, and you need it, and so you just get it. And I'm
is that
trying
more of like a
specifically.
commodity solution? Where
Kind of, yeah. I'm specifically talking about without saying what it is, because then I don't want to call anybody out, because that wouldn't really be good vendor relationships either. And while I believe in no bullshit, I'm not going to go that far.
sure, that's fair. And let's see where you can give. Yeah, I mean, this is a good point too. A lot of vendors, I mean, Senteon included, for a while, we didn't have a necessarily easy way to give feedback other than email. I mean, every vendor, every person has email. But we have now, we have an MSP Geek channel within there. We have a community. I'm working with the IR Games, Bob Miller and Stephen Kellogg, to create a CIS community where I'll post more CIS centric context and, of course, have the Senteon Success Committee. But realistically, what if they don't have like a community roadmap or a medium other than email? Is making social media posts about them helpful? How do you engage? How do you first start giving feedback?
I think I think you always you can
Eric
have an
will call
account.
out vendors.
I like that, Eric.
Stay
I'll call
tuned
you
for
next
Eric.
time.
We'll do his webinar next month, and I have a feeling he'll share thoughts.
It's not Mondays. You can't get too. I'm just kidding. You can spicy whatever day you want. No, the I think with this, like, I think you always should give them the benefit to try, right? I have not been above emailing a CEO and or accosting a CEO
Okay.
at a conference or function, and I think you try those avenues. I think sometimes though it depends on the sentiment, right? When there's been acquisitions, I'll go here without saying names. When there's been acquisitions and there's a large public sentiment and nobody is getting anywhere, I think that's definitely the time to start talking about it as an industry loudly and publicly. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's very easy to try sometimes to just err on the side of caution and be professional, but sometimes somebody doesn't respond until you start screaming. And I think there's a time and a place for both. I mean, obviously, to be honest with you, Zach, I wouldn't do that with a smaller vendor because I know that
Sure.
the client pool might be smaller. So who am I even reaching with that anyway, right? But with somebody who's a little bit larger, sometimes you have to yell to be able to be heard because the boat is so big, right?
Yeah.
So here's me and my hands. But but yeah, I feel like this is not a one size fits all. I don't think you can say this is the approach every single time. It takes some nuance and understanding the impact of what your words can have. But I think that healthy critique out there in public is not a bad thing. But if you're going to go and do that on Reddit, I mean, you have to understand that most people who
Yep.
read Reddit, who see negative stuff on Reddit, just kind of chalk it up to negative stuff on Reddit. If you actually want to be heard, you probably want to go to the places where your feedback is going to be received with some modicum
And
of
is it
like, I'm not
anonymous? I
ranting.
think that makes a difference too, having your name associated. And
Oh, that's
I
true
can't,
too. Yeah.
yeah, I can't find the comment Dean made to absolutely like and reshare, but if we could highlight that one more time, I find that absolutely hilarious. And I actually texted Brittany before this call, Amanda. I was wondering how long it'd take for you to notice my hat, but
Oh, I love it. I'm okay. To Zach's business partners out there, I think you should go more. I think you should go harder on the whole pun of it. But that's another conversation.
Dean, you might want to toss comments, and we'll keep on spinning some ideas. But it's funny, you're not the only one to say that, and even some of
Mhm.
our partners, I didn't expect to want it to go even farther. Shout out to Lawrence, and it's just hilarious because companies like Huntress and a lot of these EDR companies will go hack yourself and go the explicit route. But I mean, end of the day, it's just creating a different joke.
I think it's also speaking to the culture of the place that you're working, right? Like, so Huntress was really great about they take the security part seriously, but they don't take themselves so seriously so that you feel like they're out of touch. And then I think that's kind of part of the equation too, right? You're trying to make it approachable in a different way.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right. The last point of partnership program. That's perfect. Last point on here, emotions. It's your adult comment here. Navigating emotions. I mean, we lose deals, we get ignored, we get ghosted. This is not a vendor only thing. I imagine MSPs have their own prospects that ghost them, are mean to them, put you in a bad mood. Do you have any tips or just stories you can share? Like, how do you keep a level head, and even when you don't want to post in that community or continue to engage, how do you balance your emotions in such a, I mean, we're entrepreneurs here, this shit's our life, this is, I mean, next to our family and other things like that, this is the biggest thing in our lives.
I think it's all about balance, honestly. Like, I know it sounds easier said than done, but you have to weigh your need to be heard with the understanding that there is a business at the other end of it. And as long as you take those two things in counterbalance, anything that you're going to do to me is going to be helpful, right? I think the ghosting comment specifically is something that, oh man, that's tough. I try not to ghost people. I'm sure I've done it before because I don't like the way it feels when I get it on my end. If I've done it to any vendor out there, I'm sorry in advance. I try to be more communicative now, especially since I'm the one who's owning that vendor relationship and I'm more involved in those conversations. But it is easy to do when you forget about it. So it's just about having that circle back. Because
Yep.
if you think about those times where, you've gone to the nth degree doing your pitch and everything for an MSP client, and then you never hear anything again, it's disheartening. Yeah. So like I try not to do the same. But then again,
But it
I always
happens. That's the
apply
point. That's the
I
point here. I
apply that
wanted
if
to.
I had a meeting with somebody, that makes a difference for me. If you're sending me that cold ass email and you're trying to get me to respond, I don't care about ghosting you because there was never a situation to have a relationship anyways, right? You scan me at a booth is not the same thing as us actually booking a demo. Like to me, that's where the line is, right?
Yep. And that makes sense because I mean, the point of, I really want the audience to, and the vendors and the MSPs to hear is like, that's your life. Like
Yeah.
this is happening to you. You're navigating the same things. And
Yeah.
from my perspective, as like a company who had to do market research, so I'm one of the, I don't want to say rare, but honestly, kind of rare vendors that never started as an MSP. When I built and was doing market research on Senteon, I didn't know what MSP stood for, let alone what the hell it was. So I literally had to start my LinkedIn, my social media from zero connections in this world to finding friends and just simply do those pre-product interviews, pre-revenue market research. And I had to send a lot of messages. I'd like to think they weren't super insincere, but there was automation involved when applicable because it was
Yep.
just, I needed people to respond. I knew nobody. And I mean, as we just said, it's our baby. This was my business. If I don't have that market research conversation, we could build something completely wrong and fail.
But then
Fortunately,
you weren't getting mad at the people who didn't
right.
respond to those messages, right? Like that's where the line is for me, is those emotions need to be attached to what the reality is of the situation. You can't get mad when the 9-word email goes out and somebody doesn't respond to it. If you've sat down and you've had an actual genuine conversation, I think it's very realistic to say it's going to probably sting a little bit, especially if you were looking forward to moving forward with that person, or if you thought there was great synchronicity that you want that to go ahead. And I think that's true on the MSP and the vendor side, right? There's certain people that they probably want to work with for whatever the reason that they feel there's alignment on it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that actually exists. So just being honest about what that looks like. I just had to send 2 different emails today, so I don't feel like a hypocrite for this particular conversation to be like, hey, we're not going to go with your service. So
Honestly, that's the last point, and then we'll wrap up this slide. Hey, I'm not going to go with your service.
yeah,
Wow. I mean, how many vendors in the audience right now would love to clear their funnel up of people who
yeah,
have zero interest of moving forward?
yeah,
That would save me a lot of time so I can make
yeah,
more webinars. I don't want to call you if you don't have interest.
yeah,
And I'll also share again, since we're sharing stories. I won't share names, but my favorite, I say favorite, my least favorite, an inbound lead. They put a contact form on the website. They're like, hey, really interested in demo. Like this unique example I'm talking to so ended with have a great day. So I reached out. I sent an email. It wasn't even automated at this point in time. It was real. And I got like an aggressive email response back. Take me off these forums, whatever, whatever. And I'm like, I, I'm the owner, so I can get a little edgy. I just sent back, hey, here's a screenshot of you asking for this email. I
yeah,
did not have a great day after emailing you.
yeah.
So people get overwhelmed. People forget what they submit to. But
Yep,
I don't let that ruin my day. I kind of had fun with it, and then I moved on. My
yep.
funnel got cleared up, and it's okay.
It's about grace. And to whoever's asking in the comments, yes, May next year for MSP GeekCon, very beginning of May though.
Cool. Let's highlight that comment as well. And is there going to be a link that we can toss out into the chat, or is that not publicly made yet?
I think it
Putting you
just
on the
goes.
spot, board member.
Yeah, I think it's just mspgeek.org. I don't think there's an actual one for the conference just yet.
Cool. And I'll drop the MSP GeekCon Discord invite into the chat since that is a hot
Please.
topic of this conversation. But while I'm doing that, let's pull up this next slide.
Sure.
So we've talked a lot about this, so we don't need to go through these point by point. But while I'm pulling up this link, making relationship work, it's from that intentional conversation, that first inbound lead, and everything after that. I'm going to pull up this link and drop it to the comments. But do you mind talking towards, maybe some stories or some of these points specifically?
Well, one of the things I just said in the last slide was that I'm the one, so I'm the chief operating officer. I'm the one now who owns the vendor relationships. And before that, it would have been our service manager. And the service manager was wearing too many hats and doing too many things. So oftentimes, what would happen is the account manager would reach out, try to schedule a meeting for the current stack that we have, and be able to continue that relationship. And they were like, it's fine, it's working, I don't need to talk to you, go away. And it was kind of really short-sighted because there's so many things that gets changed and updated and whatever. And if unless you're the type of person who can literally pour over the release notes every single time and dig into it, those meetings with your account manager are really key to understand how things change. They'll put you in touch with AEs that are, or whatever term that company use, to be able to show you the product inside and out if there's something new or there's a new feature, right? So I think those are super important. Show up to them, tell them what you
Yep.
want. One of my favorite questions that I'll give as like a tip, you should be asking your account manager or whoever you're interfacing with at the company that for your vendors, the partners that work with you best, what is it they're doing different than what we're doing? That question can help you understand all the ways that you may not be leveraging your current vendors, whether that be MDF funding, whether that be feedback or advisory boards, whatever the case may be. If this is part of the ecosystem that we all contribute to, they're going to know the full gamut of what you can do, and that's going to be a different answer for every vendor.
Yep.
But it is an important question to be asking because you'll never know what is possible unless you're literally reading everything, which could be a full-time job. They can condense that for you. That's their job, right? And that's
Mhm.
part of adapting in real time. That's part of knowing the team. It's part of all the things that you have on this slide is
I mean, I want to
utilizing those.
call it especially that two-way street. You're talking about the vendor asking you the direct question, but at the end of the day, as a vendor, I'm okay with you asking the direct question right back. Like, hey, I know you do configuration management. I haven't done this in 30 years. My customers are still doing fine. Why should I take this conversation seriously? Right?
Yeah,
I'd be like, well, that was bold. Sure, I'd laugh and I'd be like, well, you scheduled time with me, so there must be something going on, but let me give you the higher level as to why this matters to the bigger picture, right?
Yeah.
I'm fine with that type of response. And any sales professional, which me and Josh Copeland have, there's salespeople, and then there's sales professionals. If they are a professional, if that account rep or that BDR is a true professional, they're not going to cower at that direct question. If
They
anything, they're going
can't.
to walk away from it and say, damn, boss manager, like this prospect told me, why the hell should they care about my platform? And like I froze, right? That's a growth point for them if they truly care about their sales profession and want to be better.
I mean, hard conversations, that could be its own thing as well. I know we keep
Mm-hmm.
highlighting things we
We
can't.
got we got some webinars to come.
but I mean, hard conversations are a necessity. I mean, I've had to have my fair share of hard conversations with clients. Like, we have a culture internally, and we will get shit done all day long and run as fast as we can, but not under threat, not under duress. That doesn't work for my team. It actually shuts them down. So we've had a couple of clients that would try to get heavy-handed and think that that would net them what it is they were looking for. And I've had to be like, I'm really sorry, but that doesn't work with my team. And that can't continue if we're going to continue this partnership. It's much the same when you're dealing with your vendors. It isn't just about what they can do, it's about the ways that they communicate. It's the ways that they go about doing what they're doing. I had another partner that we were dealing with, and my account manager was just very short
Sure.
and not at all in alignment with how we prefer to be communicated with, and would constantly, I would have to chase them. And so I just reached out to the person who was their boss and said, you know what, I think they're great for other people, but I feel like we're having a bit of a language barrier. And I don't mean that because they actually spoke a different language. I mean, like, literally the way that they communicate is different than the way that we communicate. And so we needed to get back on track that way with somebody who spoke more of the
And
way
you
that we.
hinted to the perfect transition of the next slide,
Yeah.
right? These people are not necessarily, there's bad people that exist, but these
Yeah.
people usually do not intentionally mean to be malicious or bad
No.
people. It's a lot of slimy sales that I mean, and I will share, I love sales books. I'm a big reader, right? I'll be transparent. I share Sandler sales methodology. That's my favorite one. I've read through the ones I've liked, and Miller Hyman and all that. Like that's the one I resonated with and I wanted to standardize as part of my process. And I will note, like, one of the funniest thing is when MSPs actually, they always say the worst thing MSPs are at or is sales. I don't know if that's completely true, but
Depends
the
on the
ones that
MSP.
do, yeah, well, the ones that do read those books and recognize those styles, I'll give a shout out to Sean Mackey over at, I believe it's Nut Standard. We were in a conversation and he was kind of trying to negotiate pricing, right? That's fine. Negotiate pricing with your vendors. We don't care. We're used to it. And he was trying to get me to say a number and anchor that conversation before we even did anything. And I
Mm-hmm.
simply told him, and I was like, man, I'm not going to let you anchor the price point to all of the following thoughts. And he got a huge kick out of it because I literally used the verbiage that was in the book he was reading. And he could tell, like, I gave a shit about my profession and was not just
Yeah.
another person.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the difference with ownership, though, right? Whenever you have some
Yes.
level of ownership, you're always going to give a shit in a different way. So use your words, because now you're letting me swear more. So it's fine.
Yeah, but
Um,
it's getting to that 50-minute mark. Now we're getting a little bit more
well,
lax.
you have a part of your slide too, though, that talks about that obtaining a better fit, right? So, like, I think when it comes to what does a good fit, I mean, in this call alone, I'm going to be swearing. And most things that I do, I'm going to be swearing because it is part of how I speak in my everyday, whatever. I'm not going to use profanities to denigrate someone. I'm just going
140.
to use them to communicate the importance behind something that I'm saying. So I feel like sales reps that work great with me and companies that I work well with are just like that, right? My favorite account manager will just literally call me. She'll say, "What the fuck do you want? What can I do for you?" And she's not saying that in a derogatory way. She just wants me to get to the point, and I'm okay with that because I would rather not beat around the bush. It's that's a good fit for me, right?
Yep.
And that's almost more important because we talked about that time factor. You've got on here too, like the how it's a bad rep, not a bad rep, bad for you. If that person was more long-winded, I could mesh with a part of me, but it depends on the mode I'm in that day. So being able to have that flexibility and that maybe adaptability in the moment to see where
Yep.
somebody's at in terms of their headspace is kind of important too. Um, yeah, and ambush sales, Zach, never work. Just don't work.
They don't. They're annoying. Even for the vendor doing it, I'm like, you must know how cringe this is. If they're not responding, just
No, but here's the thing though, is it actually they don't work in the new world. I think that they worked in
okay.
the old world, right? You have to remember, and Rob Ray talked about this in every single speech that he's given about the new Paxi marketplace, but like the way that people bought before is not how they buy now. And we're watching the subtle shift, and you're seeing the MSP space being impacted by it. Numbers
Yep.
in people who advertise and attack things in certain ways are down. It's not because the actual business is down, it's because the approach that used to work may not work going forward. And this is a new world where we have to be realistic about the fact that it is relationships, it is based on trust, it is, to some extent how much you're putting yourself out there and people knowing who they're doing business with, right?
Yep.
That works vendor side, that works on MSP side, and it's important that we all acknowledge it, because the sooner that we start asking for that in all of our spaces, the better we're going to understand it, the more that we're going to have research on how we better do that and new innovative ideas that go along with that.
Yep. And I mean, even to just emphasize this from a social media standpoint, right? Senteon, we release badass features. It's the coolest product on the market, the most innovative, yada, yada, yada. I'll make a post about the most badass thing about something we developed, something that just went live. And then the poster of me and my wife at dinner will get more likes.
Yeah,
We
but because
have dinner
honestly,
every night.
you should no. Here's the last like really salient thing I want to say. If you're going to do business with a vendor, you should trust that they know all those things for you. They don't really want to know about that unless you're someone who's deep into that. It's very rare that that's the case. What they really want to know is that they can trust you. And how do you build trust is by showing people who you are. So
This right
knowing that,
here.
you're out there and your wife is in there working with you, and like something about your hustle behind what you're doing is going to communicate passion. And so I don't know everything about endpoint hardening, but I do know what it looks like when people have good solid relationships. And for me, if you can have a relationship with your wife, then I feel like that's translatable into the real world. So I mean, that stuff matters, right? It's being human. People want to do business with humans, and we're going to have to deal with AI more and more. This is how we separate ourselves, right?
I love that AIs can generate images, but that's about the extent of it. Love the images because I
They should
used to
be really
search.
weird images though.
They can be, but these on this slide, full transparency, I can shoot you the prompt. Like I use image generation on every webinar, and it's the best thing in the world because when I started 50 weeks ago doing these webinars, boy, I searched a lot of Canva elements and graphics, and they never looked this good.
Yeah. Just to the one person on LinkedIn,
Yep.
education is different, right? Educating somebody on what your product does versus giving them the entire education behind what, like every aspect of your product, is two different things, right? I'm not going to buy something that I don't understand what it does, or that's going to cause more work for me just because I like somebody. But I don't need to know all the ins and outs of everything. That's just it's a non-starter, because if I understood every single part of it, I'd probably just want to build it myself, to be honest with you.
That's fair. And I will note, even this goes back to Wes Spencer. He was one of the influencing factors of me actually starting my educational series because one of the big challenges at Senteon was I don't know what risk is actually being mitigated by changing this setting. Like, is that
Mm-hmm.
actually making me more secure?
Yeah.
Again, haven't done this in 30 years. Does it really matter? Anyway, Wes was a big influence on me doing that. And what I've done since was I created all of the slides, then go into a resource hub that I just give away to anyone who wants that link, right? That's
Yeah,
just
but
a
Zach,
free
you didn't just put
access
that all into
education.
one presentation. You broke that down, right? So like
So
if
much.
you imagine if you tried to do that where you just gave a couple examples. There are people that are going to respond to the every single one that you've done, and there are going to be people that get it more from just the highlight as well, right? There's
Hmm.
different buying profiles, and that's an important part of the conversation. You can't assume that everybody's just going to be one way. You kind of have to hit to each
Yeah.
demographic.
And I'm actually diving into that. I give shout outs on all my webinars. So shout out to Empath, working with Keith right now. He's really taking a lot of my content that I've done and we're working together to identify, what's a better, we're not going to do extremely technical one setting at a time and for
Yeah.
Empath, but Sention's going to do more, how to secure RDP with settings, right?
Yeah.
Talking about the topic. And then, yes, we'll mention settings, but it's not going to educate on the individual granularities of the individual settings like I do in my weekly series. So that's something that is happening in the background that is taking a lot of time, but it's super exciting.
Can't hurt, right?
Can't hurt. All right, I will budget my time correctly. I mean, let's just show the last slide. We may just have to do a follow up, which we've talked about. But the good people factor, Amanda, we're going to run 5 minutes over just to set
I'm
expectations.
okay.
But good people factor, this is something Brittany really said and why I made it the slide title here. But what the hell is a good people factor? Is this real or is this something Brittany said while we were playing board games?
No, it's real. It's 100% real. Like it all goes based on that trust. If you know that someone, one of my favorite vendors, I worked with her when she was at a previous company. Again, keeping company names out of it. I think she might recognize herself, but we bonded
Comment if you
purely
know who you
on.
are.
I don't know if she's watching today, but we bonded purely on just talk about what it's like to be a woman in the sector. And she came on one of my podcasts and did a little like information session, and then she had me on a podcast, and it was very reciprocal back and forth. And when she left the company that we were already doing business with and went to another company, I immediately knew that we were going to do a demo of their product. And I can call her and get information of what it is that I need because I already have that inbuilt relationship. Now, I'm not saying that means I'm going to go with them. It just means that you have a better chance, right? Because I have implicit trust with her. We've already
Sure.
shown that reciprocity, and we've already shown that we both understand both sides, and then we're kind, and that if I was going to go ahead and do business with them, that she would have my back. So, like, all of that came from all these things that happened that was not about spending more money or whatever, just building those relationships. And good people in the channel get that. They understand that this is, like, I'm going to say it, I'm going to keep repeating it. It's an ecosystem we all give to each
Yes.
other, whether you're a vendor or you're an MSP. There's something to be had on all sides. And, that comes first by leading with authenticity and being just who you are without worrying about what's in it for you.
Yep. Absolutely. And I mean, just from my perspective, again, early stage vendor, I've said this many times throughout. I mean, this is a summary slide for the most part, right? Um, it makes a difference. Pre revenue, pre product, the good people factor literally let Senteon be a success story. If I was an asshole or I didn't actually, if I just did market research to ask questions without actually listening to the answer, I don't think we would be where we are today as a company, right? I
Yeah.
could have taken those meetings and said, cool, they answered all my questions and now I have their contact information. I'll toss them on that cold email, whatever. But instead, when I was doing market research, again, to any of those entrepreneurs out there just starting out, like, listen, they want to give input because it's in their best interest. They want better platforms on the market. So being sincere, being the good people factor is going to allow for everyone in the ecosystem to, well, we haven't said it this episode, rising tides. How did we
Ah,
not call out rising tides, Mendy, and all
raises
the
all ships.
trending,
Yeah.
whatever?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
So,
I think that's the thing too, is to remember that you're not leveraging a relationship. You don't leverage a relationship. You leverage information, and that's it's such a fine line about how you approach that. The information comes from having relationships, but you should want the relationship because it's a a good thing to do, to go out there and help the community versus what's in it for me. What can I get
yep.
out of it? That's going to happen. It's going to naturally happen. You don't have to look for it. It's something that you should just do because ultimately, if you make other MSPs better, if you make the channel vendors better, we're creating a better ecosystem for all of us. Because to be real, regulation could be coming for us at any time now. If we're talking about it, like regulation on us as a sector, and the better that we can maintain our own backyard and that we can share and keep an open book with a lot of these things, the more that we can keep that at bay. And I'm not saying that regulation is necessarily a bad thing, but I do think that the people who'll be regulating us probably won't be people that understand the industry. So it's a little scary from that regard.
If we can't trust the people who regulate us to know what we do, it's pretty hard also to expect a vendor to understand who we are if you don't help them.
Yeah. Yeah.
I sure as shit had no idea the features I should prioritize when we first launched. Our MVP was a bit of a struggle bus because we didn't prioritize the exact features, even though we listened. I will emphasize that we built the thing. There was things that weren't necessarily asked for out of the gate. I wish I would have been more pointed with my questions on the value scale so that we could have prioritized differently. But at the end of the day, we continued to listen and we continued to develop, and now we're here.
I
All right.
have one more thing I just want to say
Yep.
really quick because somebody just posted about channel hermits. And I think a lot of times I've had some MSPs that I talk to that will say, well, what is in it for me? right? Even my own staff will ask me questions about, and since I know they're on here, they'll ask me, like, what do you get out of going to these conferences and talking to vendors? Well, for example, we're Huntress partners. One conversation between one of my technicians and them at MSP GeekCon led to them adding a feature to what they're doing that's going to directly benefit us. It'll benefit the channel as well, but it'll directly benefit us in terms of how we train people to deal with incident response. The feedback that you give to vendors who listen changes things in ways that you will never anticipate or see immediate effect on. We have to stop thinking of things as like, I need to see ROI right now,
Yep.
and just understanding this is a long game. This is something that you have to be in it, and just look at the people who've been doing that for a very long time and all the ways that they've been able to navigate and benefit the businesses they work for or themselves.
Yep. Absolutely. So, I mean, coining that channel hermit coin, I love that comment too. I mean, what's okay, we got to wrap up.
No,
Sorry.
I'm still good. I don't know if everybody else is good, but
I
I'm
don't think
still
the
good.
audience is good. They want to hear about the wrap up of no. I mean, channel hermit, good or bad. I mean, it's not a bad thing, is it?
I don't think it's a bad thing, but I think it depends on what is driving it, right? So, like, if you're a channel hermit because you have an internal monologue that you don't belong, or that somebody else is more important than you, or like you look at somebody like Matt Lee and go, oh, Matt Lee's untouchable, right? The thing is, though, if you run up to Matt at a conference, he'll make time for you. Like, he doesn't see himself that way. None of the people see themselves that way. And I think it's really easy to get in your own head about, what you have to give back, or what space that you have, or who you're allowed to talk to. All of that is bullshit. It's all
Yes.
literally fucking bullshit. And I mean, like, I think I'm a prime example of that, to be honest with you. I will say it again. When I went to the first MSPD con, I had no idea who I was talking to. And it
Yep.
turns out, like, that I made friends with people that were very well known in the industry. And, people are like, how did you make friends with them? Like, well, because I didn't know. I didn't know who they were. So, like,
Treated them
if,
like a
if I
human.
walked into it without the preconceived notion, I just walked into it with my happy self of who I am, then anybody can do that, and they'd be surprised at the places they'd be welcome to, right? Just walk in and be friendly and open
Yep.
and ready to learn, and get out of your own way. I think that
Yep.
that's the reason why you're being a hermit. That probably needs to stop. Join MSP Geek, put weird memes up, you can terrorize me with Geraldine if you can figure out what that is, consider its own capture the flag. And yeah, I mean, just join something. It doesn't really matter what it is. I'm obviously going to say MSP Geek, but we're also Robin members. I'm in the Tech Degenerates Discord. There's lots of great communities out there. I think it's just about finding the one, much like we talked about the vendors, that has the voice that fits with you. I'm just always going to say MSP Geek because that's where I found my home. That's the one where I feel the most myself. So
I love it. All right. With that, let's get to this wrap up slide because we got to be a little respectful of everyone's
sure.
schedule. So on the Senteon side, and let's make this the big screen for the moderator. So on the Senteon side, we do have our weekly webinar series tomorrow with Joe Alapat, which he emailed me yesterday saying this is his first day back in the office. So this will be his raw reaction of how RoarCon went and his first publicly addressed statements of how amazing I imagine it went. I've heard good things, and the photos of the football field, I was very
Yeah.
jealous I missed. But Joe's coming on tomorrow, co-founder of Lion Guard, and a big thing that I get asked pretty often is, hey, aren't Senteon and Lion Guard, competitors, right? Hardening is very different than scanning and vulnerability. So we'll dive into that a little bit tomorrow. So if you want to learn more about how Lion Guard and Senteon work together, that's a good opportunity. Then we're going to be closing out the Chrome hardening series with Chris Lair coming up at the end of the month, or rather mid. And then we'll have Jared Brantley next week talking about automation, which I heard he's done the topic a few times. So hopefully we can go a little bit deeper and see where that goes. And then the one thing I know, Amanda, you have coming on next week. You mind sharing what Ask Me Anything with Hoodoo is?
I think it's next week. Yeah, it's on the 22nd. Probably maybe a week and a half in the future, something like that. I'm going to be on Reddit with Hoodoo doing an Ask Me Anything hour just about documentation standards and best practices.
That's awesome to hear, and supporting those partners as opposed to transactional. So, Amanda,
Yes.
absolute pleasure having you on. I think we have like 3 other topics. I hope you were writing down because I know I was not.
It's recorded, right? You can just go
It's
back
recorded.
and
We'll just
run it through Chat GPT and ask it what we should be
GPT.
talking
What were
about.
the
That's where you
topics
use automation and AI. That's how you do it.
and images? Anyway,
Yeah.
all right. Absolute pleasure. Thank you, Amanda.
Exactly.
See